You know what's missing from your Christmas table? The same thing that's been missing for the last 20 years. I'm talking about those recipes your grandmother made that seemed impossible. The ones that took 3 days, required ingredients you'd never heard of, and somehow tasted better than anything you could buy today. Remember when Christmas dinner wasn't just turkey and store-bought pie? When your mom spent December turning the kitchen into something that smelled like cinnamon and secrets. Today we're bringing back 25 recipes that deserve another chance. Some of them sound weird. A few might even sound terrible. But every single one of them made Christmas feel like Christmas. Aspic Molds. Here's where we get into territory that makes modern people uncomfortable. Aspic molds were huge from the 30s through the 70s. If you wanted to look sophisticated at your Christmas party, you served something suspended in gelatin. Vegetables, seafood, even meat, all floating in a perfectly shaped dome of clear or tomato-flavored Jell-O. Tomato aspic was the Christmas favorite because of the color. Bright red, glossy, unmolded onto a plate of lettuce. Women spend hours getting these things to set properly. One wrong move, and the whole thing collapsed. But when it worked, when that mold slid out perfect and wobbled just right on the serving platter, you'd won. Magazine spreads in the 50s and 60s made aspic look like high art. By the 80s, people decided they wanted food to look like food again, and aspic disappeared almost overnight. Now it's just something we laugh about in old cookbooks. But for 30 years, it meant you knew what you were doing in the kitchen. Christmas tree-shaped cheese ball. The 70s gave us a lot of questionable food trends, but the Christmas tree cheese ball was actually genius. Someone looked at the regular cheese ball from the 50s and decided it needed to be festive. So they shaped it like a tree, covered it in chopped pecans and parsley, stuck pimento strips on it like garland, and suddenly you had a centerpiece that people actually wanted to eat. The base is cream cheese and sharp cheddar, but here's the secret ingredient that nobody talks about: crushed pineapple. Just enough to add sweetness without making it taste like dessert. These showed up at every suburban holiday party between 1972 and 1985. People would stand around it with crackers, admiring the thing before they destroyed it. That was half the fun. Good Housekeeping and Better Homes and Gardens ran full photo spreads on how to make your cheese ball look perfect. Women competed over whose tree looked better. You don't see these anymore, which is a shame because they actually taste good. Sausage balls. Walk into any Southern Christmas party in 1975 and you'd find these on the table. Sausage, sharp cheddar, and Bisquick mixed together, rolled into balls, baked until crispy. That's the whole recipe. But they're addictive. The outside gets golden and crunchy, the inside stays soft and cheesy, and they're the perfect size to grab 3 at a time without anyone judging you. My aunt made hundreds of these every December. She'd freeze them in batches and pull them out whenever people came over. Kids loved them because they tasted like breakfast and a snack at the same time. Adults loved them because you could make 200 in under an hour. They showed up next to the eggnog, the aspic, the cheese ball, part of the whole 70s Christmas spread. You still see sausage balls at potluck sometimes, but they were everywhere back then. A simple recipe that just worked. Pinwheel Potato Candy. Let's start with something that makes absolutely no sense until you try it. You take a potato, mash it up, and somehow end up with candy. I know how that sounds. But German immigrants who came to Pennsylvania in the 1800s figured out that a warm mashed potato could soak up nearly 2 pounds of powdered sugar. The potato disappears completely. What you get instead is this smooth, sweet dough that rolls out flat. Spread peanut butter on it, roll it tight, chill it down, and slice it into spirals. My grandmother made these every Christmas in her kitchen in Scranton. She'd let us kids watch the whole thing, and we never believed her until we saw that potato turn to candy right in front of us. The trick is using the potato while it's still hot. Cold potatoes won't absorb the sugar the same way. Some families up in the coal towns still make these, and a few rebels swap chocolate for peanut butter. Purists say that ruins it, but I think they're just protective of the old way. Grandma's stuffed celery. This one's so simple, it almost doesn't count as a recipe. But every grandmother had her version, and every kid had an opinion about which filling was best. You take celery sticks, fill them with cream cheese or peanut butter or pimento cheese. Maybe add some paprika or chopped walnuts on top. And that's it. Done. But these things were everywhere in the 70s. Birthday parties, Christmas dinners, church potlucks. They gave you something crunchy and light when everything else on the table was heavy and rich. My mom kept the recipe written on an index card tucked into her Better Homes cookbook. The card was stained and warped from years of use. That's how you knew it was important. Nobody makes these anymore unless they're trying to be retro. But back then, stuffed celery was just what you did. Mary's Christmas shrimp tree. This is peak 70s creativity right here. Someone named Mary, somewhere in suburban America, decided that shrimp cocktail needed to be vertical. So she took a foam cone, covered it in foil, stuck toothpicks in it, and skewered shrimp all over the thing until it looked like a Christmas tree. Then she added cherry tomatoes, parsley, black olives, whatever made it look festive. The thing was ridiculous and amazing at the same time. It sat in the middle of the table like a sculpture. Guests would pull shrimp off it all night while compliments flew around the room. Women's magazines loved this stuff. They'd run step-by-step photo instructions on how to make your shrimp tree look professional. Cocktail parties in the 70s were all about presentation. How fancy could you make regular food look? How much could you impress people before they even tasted anything? By the 90s, people stopped trying so hard, and the shrimp tree went extinct. But if you grew up in the 80s, you remember seeing one of these at somebody's house. Crab-stuffed mushrooms. In the early 70s, French cooking was the height of sophistication, and Americans wanted to bring some of that elegance to their own parties. Crab-stuffed mushrooms were the answer. You'd get big mushroom caps, fill them with crab meat mixed with cream cheese and breadcrumbs, bake them until golden, and serve them hot. They looked impressive. They smelled incredible. They tasted like you'd spent all day in the kitchen, even though the whole thing took maybe 40 minutes. These were expensive to make. Crab wasn't cheap, and using it for an appetizer meant you had money to spare. That's part of why people made them. They wanted guests to know this was a special occasion. By the 80s, people got tired of all the work. Pre-made appetizers became more acceptable, and crab-stuffed mushrooms slowly disappeared from home menus. But for about 10 years, they were the thing to serve if you wanted to impress people at Christmas. Which one of these first 10 recipes hits you hardest? Which one did your grandmother make? Drop a comment, and let's keep this conversation going. Egg rolls. This one surprises people. Egg rolls at Christmas? But in the 70s, when Americans started getting interested in Chinese food, egg rolls became a cocktail party staple. They were exotic, but not too exotic. Crispy, easy to eat with your hands, perfect with sweet and sour sauce. You could buy them frozen, heat them up, and suddenly your party felt worldly and sophisticated. Baby boomers loved adding international touches to their holiday menus. Egg rolls fit right in next to the cheese ball and the aspic. They gave people something different to talk about, something that felt modern and adventurous compared to the same old appetizers their parents served. By the 90s, egg rolls were just takeout food again. But for about 15 years, they had a solid spot on the Christmas appetizer table. A weird little moment in American food history that actually made sense at the time. Green tomato mincemeat pie. During the Depression, meat was expensive and so were raisins. But people still wanted mincemeat pie at Christmas because that's what you were supposed to have. So someone figured out that green tomatoes, cooked down with apples, raisins, sugar, vinegar, and a lot of spices, tasted almost exactly like traditional mincemeat. The texture was right. The tartness was right. If you didn't tell people what was in it, they couldn't guess. My great-grandmother made this pie every year through the 40s and 50s. She'd simmer the filling for hours until the whole house smelled like cinnamon and cloves. Then she'd store it in a crock in the basement for a few weeks to let the flavors marry. Some neighbors swore they could taste the difference. Most couldn't. The recipe spread through church cookbooks and sewing circles, passed along by women who knew how to make something out of nothing. It stayed popular in rural areas into the 60s. Now it's mostly forgotten unless you've got a garden full of green tomatoes in the fall and you're feeling adventurous. Aged fruitcake. Real fruitcake, the kind our grandmothers made, started in September. Not December. September. You'd bake this dense, heavy cake loaded with dried fruit that had been soaking in brandy for weeks. Then you'd wrap it in cheesecloth soaked in more brandy, put it in a tin, stick it in the basement, and every week you'd unwrap it and give it another dose of alcohol. By Christmas, that cake weighed as much as a brick and tasted like nothing else on earth. The alcohol mellowed out. The fruit and spices melted together into something complex and rich. This wasn't the dry, sad fruitcake people make fun of now. This was a culinary project that required planning and patience. You couldn't rush it. The weight was important. A good fruitcake should feel substantial in your hand, dense with fruit and nuts and flavor. Modern fruitcakes are light and fluffy and completely miss the point. The old ones were about preservation, about making something in the fall that got better as winter came on. Sugar plums. The song talks about sugar plums dancing in children's heads, but most people today have no idea what they actually are. They're not plums at all. They're these little balls made from dried figs, dates, apricots, almonds, all ground up together with honey and spices. You roll them by hand, dust them in sugar, and store them in a tin. The whole process takes hours. Victorian families made these in early December, and the flavors would develop over weeks. The longer they sat, the better they got. Making sugar plums was a family event. Kids would help roll the balls while adults told stories. The spices used were expensive back then, so these weren't everyday candy. They were special, something you ration out carefully through the holidays. The name comes from the shape, which looks like a small plum, and the word sugar meant anything precious and sweet. Modern energy balls are sort of related, but they miss the point. Sugar plums were about patience, about making something that took time to become what it was supposed to be. Brandy Hard Sauce. Hard sauce isn't sauce at all. It's butter. Butter beaten with powdered sugar until it's fluffy and white, then spiked with brandy drop by drop until it tastes like Christmas morning feels. Before electric mixers, making hard sauce meant beating butter by hand until your arm gave out. You'd serve it cold on top of hot plum pudding. The cold butter would hit the hot pudding and melt into these rich, fragrant streams that soaked into every bite. The alcohol vapor would rise up and mix with the spice smells from the pudding. That combination was what Christmas dessert was supposed to be. Hard sauce kept for weeks in the icebox, ready whenever guests showed up. Making it right meant you had good butter, good sugar, and good brandy. Not cheap ingredients. Serving it meant your family was doing okay. Modern dessert sauces are easier and faster and completely miss the experience of watching that butter slowly melt into the pudding. Pfeffernüsse Cookies. These German pepper nut cookies have been around since medieval times. They're famous for being rock hard when you first bake them. German bakers would tell you to make them in early December and store them in a tin with apple slices or bread so they'd slowly soften by Christmas. The dough is loaded with spices: white pepper, black pepper, anise, cardamom, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. When you bite into one fresh from the oven, it's like biting a marble. But that's the point. You're supposed to wait. Kids would hide them away and check on them every few days, watching them transform from hard cookies into something chewy and spiced. Some kids would just suck on them like hard candy, letting the peppery warmth slowly spread across their tongue. The aging process was part of the tradition. It taught patience. Modern recipes make them soft from the start, which completely misses the lesson. Pfeffernusse were never supposed to be easy. Nutty Puppy Chow. Late 70s, early 80s, this snack was everywhere. Chex cereal coated in melted chocolate and peanut butter, shaken in a bag with powdered sugar until every piece was covered. Then you'd add peanuts or pecans for crunch and saltiness. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes to make, and people couldn't stop eating it. Kids loved it because it was basically dessert disguised as a snack. Adults loved it because it was easy to make in huge batches for parties. You'd see it in a big bowl on the coffee table next to the TV during Christmas specials. The name was weird, calling it Puppy Chow or Muddy Buddies depending on where you lived, but nobody cared because it tasted good. This one actually stuck around longer than most recipes on this list. You still see it sometimes at potlucks and holiday gatherings. But its peak was definitely the 80s when convenience and sugar ruled Christmas snacking. Divinity Candy. Divinity was the ultimate test of whether you knew what you were doing in the kitchen. This candy required perfect weather. If the humidity was too high, it wouldn't set. You had to boil sugar syrup to exactly 260 degrees, Then pour it in a thin stream into beaten egg whites while someone else kept beating. Usually took 2 people, one pouring, one beating. Get it wrong, and you'd have sweet soup. Get it right, and you'd have these cloud-like white candies that melted on your tongue. Southern grandmothers would check the weather forecast before attempting divinity. They'd store the finished candies in tins with wax paper between layers, only bringing them out for special guests. The name comes from how it looks, white and fluffy and almost heavenly. Modern marshmallow versions don't come close. Real divinity was temperamental and difficult, and that's exactly why it mattered. Making it meant you had skill. Moravian Spice Cookies. These cookies from Moravian settlements are rolled so thin you can see through them. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual goal. The dough is heavy with molasses and lard, and it has to rest overnight before you can work with it. Then you roll it paper thin, cut it into stars and angels, and bake it until it's crisp. Moravian churches made thousands of these for their Christmas love feasts. Community events where everyone gathered and shared food and stories. Some families still have cookie cutters from the 1700s that they use every December. The cookies store for months in tins, and the flavor actually gets better as the spices meld together. But rolling them thin enough takes real skill. Most modern cooks try once, get frustrated, and give up. The technique isn't something you can learn from a recipe. You need someone to show you. That's why these cookies are disappearing. The knowledge isn't being passed down anymore. Tom and Jerry cocktail. Before coffee makers and instant everything, the Tom and Jerry cocktail was serious business. This drink goes back to the 1820s. You'd beat egg yolks and whites separately with sugar and spices until your arm hurt. Combine them into this thick batter, then store in the fridge. On Christmas morning, you'd scoop some batter into a mug, add rum and brandy, top it with hot milk, and you had a drink that warmed you from the inside out. Our grandfathers served this first thing on Christmas morning. It was tradition. President Harding served it at the White House. Bartenders would make giant batches that lasted through New Year's. The drink had weight to it. It felt important. But beating eggs by hand takes effort, and once convenience culture took over, people stopped bothering. Now it's mostly forgotten except by cocktail nerds trying to revive old recipes. But for about 150 years, this was the Christmas morning drink in American homes. Christmas plum pudding. This isn't fruitcake. This is something completely different. Christmas plum pudding is a British tradition that Americans took seriously for about 100 years. You'd start 5 weeks before Christmas on Stir Up Sunday. Every family member would take a turn stirring the pudding mixture and making a wish. You'd hide silver coins or charms inside for luck. Then you'd steam it for 8 hours, store it, and steam it again on Christmas Day. When you brought it to the table, you'd pour brandy over it and light it on fire. Blue flames flickering across the pudding while everyone watched. It was theater. It was magic. Victorian families made these a year in advance because they got better with age. The whole house would smell like spices and steam. But by the 70s, nobody had time for an all-day steaming process. The tradition died out in America, even though it's still hanging on in Britain. A shame, really, because nothing else feels quite as festive. If you're feeling nostalgic, hit that like button and subscribe. We're bringing these recipes back whether modern cooking likes it or not. Stollen or German Christmas bread. German Christmas bread takes 3 days to make right. The dough is rich with butter and studded with rum-soaked fruit. After you bake it, you brush it with melted butter 3 times, then dust it with powdered sugar multiple times over several days. That creates a sweet crust that preserves the bread and adds layers of flavor. Hidden in the center is a log of marzipan. It represents the baby Jesus wrapped in cloth. That religious symbolism matters. Stollen isn't just bread. It's a statement of faith. German bakers would age their stollen for weeks before Christmas. The flavors would deepen and mellow. Families ordered them from bakeries or made their own on December weekends. Dresden Stollen is protected by law. Only bread made in Dresden following specific rules can use that name. Real Stollen is dense and rich, nothing like the dry commercial versions you see in stores now. Making it properly requires patience and precision. 3 days of work for 1 loaf of bread. But that's exactly why it matters. Ribbon Gelatin Salad. This one took 3 days. Each layer of gelatin had to set completely before you added the next one. You'd alternate clear layers made with fruit juice and creamy layers made with sour cream or cream cheese. The temperature of each new layer had to be just right. Too hot, and it melted the layer underneath. Too cold, and it wouldn't stick. Women would plan their whole schedule around making these for Christmas parties. The moment you unmold, it was dramatic. If it worked, if all those layers came out perfect and wobbled just right on the plate, everyone gasped. Magazines photographed these things like they were works of art. Women competed over whose ribbon mold looked best. The gelatin had to be crystal clear, the cream layers perfectly opaque, the colors alternating in exact order. By the 80s, people decided 3 days was too long to spend on a side dish. Ribbon gelatin salads disappeared almost completely, but they represented something important about that era. The belief that food should be beautiful, even if it took days to make. Ambrosia Salad. Ambrosia started as a simple Victorian dessert. Just oranges, coconut, and sugar. That's it. Nothing else. You'd layer them in a bowl on Christmas Eve and let them sit overnight. The oranges would release their juice and mix with the sugar and coconut into this light, fresh syrup. Back then, getting fresh oranges in winter was expensive and rare. Having them at Christmas felt like a luxury. The dish was meant to refresh your palate after heavy holiday food. Making it properly took time. You had to peel each orange perfectly, removing all the bitter white pith without losing the juice. That kind of care showed respect for expensive ingredients. Later, probably in the 50s or 60s, someone added marshmallows and canned fruit cocktail, maybe whipped cream, maybe maraschino cherries. The dish turned into something completely different. Sweeter, heavier, less elegant. That marshmallow version is what most people think of now when they hear ambrosia. But the original was beautiful in its simplicity. Leff's Norwegian Potato Flatbread. Norwegian grandmothers could roll leffs thinner than paper. That skill took years to learn. The dough starts with mashed potatoes, still warm, mixed with flour, butter, and cream. It has to rest overnight. Then you roll it out with a grooved rolling pin on a special board, getting it so thin you can almost see through it. You cook it on a dry griddle until it gets brown spots, then fold it up and stack it. Eating leffs is a ritual. Spread butter on it, sprinkle sugar or cinnamon, roll it up tight, and eat it like a soft taco. Minnesota Norwegians would gather for leffs-making sessions in December. Women working together, rolling hundreds of pieces, telling stories while their hands worked. The skill rarely gets passed down now. Rolling leffs that thin requires practice most people don't have time for anymore. You can buy it at Scandinavian bakeries, but it's not the same as making it yourself. Not the same as learning from your grandmother's hands. Oyster Stew. Christmas Eve for Catholic families meant no meat. But oysters were allowed, so oyster stew became the tradition. The recipe is simple but unforgiving. Melt butter in a pot. Add fresh oysters. Pour in whole milk. Heat it just until the oyster edges curl. 30 seconds too long and the oysters turn rubbery. You had to watch it constantly. The proper way to eat, it was to sip the rich broth first, saving the oysters for last. Irish and Italian Catholic families in port cities made this their one luxury meal of the year. Fresh oysters in winter were expensive before refrigeration made seafood common. Families would stretch the cost by making stew, letting a few oysters feed everyone. The tradition faded when the church relaxed meatless rules in the 60s. Oysters got more expensive. People worried about raw seafood. By the 80s, oyster stew on Christmas Eve was rare. Older people still remember the anticipation. Waiting for Dad to come home with the oysters, watching Mom heat the milk, knowing that this one meal marked Christmas Eve as special. Rum Balls. Rum Balls solved the problem. What do you do with leftover cake scraps and broken cookies? You grind them into crumbs, mix them with cocoa powder and enough dark rum to make everything stick together, then roll them into balls and coat them in more cocoa or powdered sugar. Let them sit overnight so the rum mellows out and soaks into the crumbs. These were adults-only treats. Too much alcohol for kids. Women would make them in December and hide them on a high shelf or in the back of the fridge where little hands couldn't reach. Making rum balls came with a ritual. Adults would sample the rum first, just to make sure it was good enough. At least that's what they said. Modern versions use rum extract or cut way back on the alcohol, which defeats the purpose. Real rum balls had a warm, boozy richness that made them feel indulgent and slightly dangerous. They were a treat that reminded you Christmas wasn't just for kids. Raw Cranberry Orange Relish. Every Thanksgiving morning, someone would clamp the hand grinder to the kitchen table and start cranking. Fresh cranberries would go through first, then a whole orange, peel and all. The pith added bitterness that balanced the sour cranberries and the sugar you mixed in after. The mixture had to sit overnight for the flavors to come together. Kids fought over who got to turn the crank because the sounds were satisfying. That pop and crack of cranberries splitting open, the spray of juice, the smell that filled the kitchen. Not cooking the relish meant all the vitamins stayed intact, which mattered in winter when fresh produce was harder to find. This stuff kept for weeks in the fridge and got better over time. You'd serve it with turkey on Christmas, then use it on leftover turkey sandwiches for days after. The fresh, bright taste cut through heavy winter food. Most people buy king cranberry sauce now, but the raw relish was sharper, more alive, and worth the effort. What Christmas recipe do you miss most? The one your grandmother made that nobody makes anymore? Leave a comment. Let's keep these memories alive. And subscribe if you want more of this. We've got plenty more forgotten recipes to explore.